Shalom, shalom. To anybody who is going to watch this video, who was watching our video, welcome back. This is Eitan ben Abraham for Aleph Mail here in the Holy Land of Israel, and I am joined by the one and only Rabbi Chaim Litivin, otherwise known as the Bourbon Rabbi. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So I'm just going to share with the audience how I found you. Basically, as anyone who follows Aleph Mail knows, I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook, and I'm very interested in the Jewish content ecosystem and just like-minded people out there who are, on the one hand, in the Torah world, in the Jewish world, and then on the other hand, have a universal quality. And as soon as I saw your logo that said the Bourbon Rabbi, I was like, well, that is fascinating. That is definitely somebody I want to talk to because they're straddling both words. And then I found your video series on Instagram, Torah and Tastings, which, you know, is Tastings of Torah, right?
Tasting Torah.
Tasting Torah, which is a, you know, allusion to both tasting bourbon. Is it more than bourbon or just bourbon?
I did a rye whiskey, but it's mostly bourbon.
Okay, so it's really niche. It's tasting
I'm not
bourbon.
prejudiced.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, you know, you can make a l'chaim, you can make a l'chaim.
That's right.
And then at the same time, some amazing divrei Torah.
Yeah,
and so I love the synthesis and fusion, and so I'll just hand it over to you, Rabbi Chaim. How did you get started? How did you find yourself creating this channel?
So the tastings was really came from Corona. I was stuck at home. I had a few tastings. I do tastings around the country, around the world. Different Kiddush clubs, Chabad houses, stuff like that. So I've been all over the States. I had a few planned in Canada and California, and everything got canceled because of the virus. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to taste some stuff anyway.
So this is a new channel. This is like a new venture.
Yeah, this started, I think, in March.
Oh, wow. You've created a lot of content since then. You've been busy.
Well, I started as the Bourbon Rabbi well before that. But these the Dvar Torah with the tasting is fairly new. I've done it every Thursday, except when there was a Yom Tov. You know, Pesach fell in there. Shavuos was a Thursday night, so I missed that one as well. But yeah, it's basically every Thursday for almost 3 months.
We have a message from Manny Shevitz. Do you know who Manny Shevitz is?
I know the play on. I don't know who that is.
I hear the word. He says, "Come to Fort Worth. We could hang and drink some whiskey." Okay.
I was in Dallas a few months ago. Happy to come back to Texas. Texas is a good place.
Yeah, Texas. Yeah. Okay, so how did you become the Bourbon Rabbi before you launched your channel? As in, what's your origin story?
So I was born in Louisville, Kentucky. My parents are Chabad Shluchim here.
I associate Kentucky with like whiskey and hard liquor and bourbon.
So 95% of bourbon is made in Kentucky.
Oh wow!
There's a bunch of rules that make bourbon bourbon. One of them is that it has to be made in the United States. A lot of people think it has to be made in Kentucky, but that isn't true. But the vast majority of it is. It's about 95% of bourbon is made in Kentucky.
Okay, and what makes... Listen, I am ignorant about these things, but I'm also interested in these things. So when you say bourbon has to be made in the United States, why? In order for it to be bourbon, and if it was made in Ireland, then what would it be called?
Irish whiskey.
Okay,
so it's like the champagne. Champagne has to be made in Champagne. It's a geographical thing. Sherry has to be made in Spain. Port has to be made in Portugal. Scotch has to be made in Scotland. So a lot of these things are demographically constructed and has to be made in those places. Canadian whiskey has to be made in Canada, Irish whiskey in Ireland. Bourbon is the native spirit of America, and Congress made that official and trademarked the name, for lack of a better term.
And
I think back in the 60s. Sorry?
Are the ingredients different than, say, Irish whiskey or Canadian whiskey?
So most scotches, for example, are going to be barley, malted barley, as their sole grain, or at least the large majority. Bourbon has to be at least 51% corn. There are some bourbons that are 100% corn. They're very rare. The majority of bourbons will have 3 grains, usually a corn, rye, and a barley. Some will have 2, some will have 3, some will have 4. Maker's Mark, for example, is a wheated bourbon. So that's probably the 4th most common grain in bourbon. And there are some companies that are experimenting with quinoa and, the one-off grains. But the large majority of bourbons are made out of corn primarily, at least 51%. And the rest of the mash bill or recipe is going to be barley, rye, and some wheat.
And is the reason why corn has to be 50%, is that what makes it American?
That's just one of the characteristics. The TTB, which is the governing body of the government that controls what is and isn't bourbon, has dictated. There's 7 or 8 rules they have in place that if all of those are abided by, then the end product will be bourbon.
So many chefs ask, is there Jewish whiskey?
Does that mean whiskey made by Jews?
It's an interesting question. There is Golan Heights Distillery in Israel which makes whiskey.
Yeah.
Shout out to David Liebel. I think maybe what he's asking in the same way, like there's like scotch from Scotland and Canadian whiskey is from Canada and port is from Portugal. Is there some sort of liquor or spirit that's distinctly Jewish?
There are a lot of Jews in the bourbon industry and have been since the beginning. In fact, the first bourbon was made by a guy with a Jewish sounding name. His name was Elijah. But the first distillery in the United States that was sanctioned by the federal government was run by a Jewish man named Isaac Bernheim.
What year was that?
Back in the 1800s.
So this is before Prohibition?
Yes, yeah.
Interesting.
So he had the first distillery ever sanctioned by the federal government, and there's over 20,000 of them now. So
it's come a long way. It's so interesting how Jews are at like the origin of things. Jews
were making alcohol back in Europe before we came to America. And that has had a lot to do with it. Also, we wanted kind of control of how it was made to ensure that it was kosher throughout the years, because alcohol, as we know, takes a large... Judaism has a large interest in alcohol with Kiddush and l'chaims, and we have drinks with a lot of different things. We sanctify every Shabbos and holiday with it. We always make a l'chaim at a wedding and a bar mitzvah and a bris, and there's a lot of drinking and alcohol throughout the circle of life in Judaism, and Jews have always been in that industry, dating all the way back.
So jumping back into your origin story, so how did you get into bourbon?
So my family's been involved in the kosher side of bourbon for over 30 years, ever since I was a thought. There's a lot of bourbon distilleries, obviously, in Kentucky. My parents have been here for over 30 years, and actually what got them involved initially was making sure that the distilleries owned by Jews would have their chametz sold over Pesach.
Yeah, there's a lot of chametz.
All the ingredients in bourbon are chametz, so they had to make sure that that during that aging process, even if it was, a really, really young bourbon, if it's aged over one Pesach, it becomes undrinkable. A 20-year-old product becomes undrinkable 19 years before it even gets in a bottle. Once it passes that first Passover, it kind of ceases to be drinkable for us.
Let me just reflect that. So, if at any time there is a bourbon that is fermenting during Pesach, it cannot be drunk.
Aging, yeah, or fermenting. But yeah, the fermenting process is just a few weeks or days. The process of making bourbon is you get your grains together. All your grains and your water is called your mash bill. It means it's like a recipe, and that ferments. So the alcohol starts being created. The sugars break down. After that process, it gets distilled. That's basically heating up the liquid, turning it into a vapor. That vapor gets cooled back down and comes down as a liquid. That's clear. That's called moonshine or raw dog or clear or new make, a bunch of different names for the same thing. That product is what goes into the barrel and gets aged.
And so when you say it can't be aged over Pesach, that means that it just has to be sold.
Right. So obviously it's going to age. If you have a 2-year-old whiskey, it's definitely past a Passover. What has to happen is that has to be sold to a non-Jew over the week of Passover in order for a Jew not to own it during that week.
So we had another question from Manny Chavez. I'll just try it again. Can you make is the same blessing for whiskey that you use for wine? You want to take that, Rabbi Chaim?
Interestingly, it's not. The blessing for whiskey would be the Shahakol Niya Bidvaro, and the blessing on the wine would be the Borei Peri Hagafen. What's interesting about that, what's special about wine more than other things, just to add a little Dvar Torah, we don't want to go too long without a little taste of Torah. Wine is from grapes, and that's the only thing that a derivative of the initial item has a higher level blessing. So a grapes would have the blessing of ha'etz from the vine. The liquid that comes from that has a higher level of blessing of a borei peri hagafen. Any other fruit juice, so oranges would have the ha'etz blessing, but its juice would have the shahakol. Same like the whiskey, which comes from corn and wheat and barley and rye. So those are all grains from the ground, the hadama blessing. But once it's separated out, it becomes a lower level, and it gets the shahakol blessing. And that's why we use wine at a wedding to show that we're hoping that our children, our offspring that come next, are higher and better. And that's why the Inve Hagefen is commonly sung at weddings. What comes from the wine, from the grapes, is the wine. We want our children to be even better and at a higher level. And that's why nachas is so important in Judaism. And we're always trying to help and build the next generation to be even greater than we are.
So just to reflect that, because it's incredibly deep, you're saying that wine, which is a derivative of grapes, has a higher level bracha, which is in contrast to something like whiskey, which has a lower level bracha, meaning you would be making ha'adamah on a lot of those ingredients, like corn at least would be adamah, right? Some of those would be mizonos.
Well, yeah, you don't eat raw grain. Technically, if you do, it would probably be ha'adamah.
Interesting.
But not something you eat.
Yeah, sorry. That concept of that the derivative is in some way, shape, or form even a higher level, which is associated with wine, which is a metaphor for progressing, and moving to higher levels, which is ultimately, we could say, a muscle of that movement towards Mashiach. It's one of the things that I love about Torah, because for those of you who are familiar with my background, I had a phase where I got into Buddhism growing up in New Jersey in an upper middle class Jewish family, and rejecting materialism and consumerism, and not knowing anything about my own religion or my own tradition. I'm Muslim. And in Buddhism, there's a very strong renunciation path, meaning renounce everything, renounce the world, renounce money, renounce having a family, go meditate in a cave, go become a monk. It's a renunciate path. You have to renounce worldliness in order to refine yourself spiritually. And I thought it was an incredible, some Jersey love from John Morris, right back at you. I thought it was incredible within Torah, within Judaism, that rather than protecting the world in order to discover spirituality, you actually elevate, you sanctify the world. So
it's actually what I spoke about last week on my my tasting was exactly that topic. The Nazir we learned about last week has to give an offering, a sin offering, when he finishes his Nazirite period. So he just took, all these restrictions upon himself to be better, and when he finishes that, he has to give a sin offering. Is kind of counterintuitive, but the reason is because he withheld from the wine, and he didn't take all those things God put out there and make those better. That's the issue that he has, and that's what he has to atone for.
Mm-hmm. So can you talk more about that in terms of like the Torah's value system of how Torah relates to the physical world, and then bring that back with you? Because I'd like to hear you talk about it, but just the whole way Jews relate to alcohol in a lot of ways is very different than many people, and I think it has to do with the spiritual basis for how we relate to the world.
So there's a great story about this. One of the Hasidim back in Russia found out he was being freed from prison. He would be freed the next day, and he wanted to celebrate. So he wanted to have a l'chaim, but he couldn't go and get it. He was in prison. So he got some money to one of the guards, and he asked the guard, he said, if you buy a bottle, I'll give you the money for it and we'll share it. And they were both drinking. They were both started dancing. And then the next guard comes in, and he says, what's going on? How are you both, drinking like equals? And the chassid says, I'm drinking because I know what's coming. I'm happy about the future. I'm drinking to life and to what's gonna be. The guard was just drinking to drink. And that's the difference. We have to have that perspective of happiness and joy, not drinking to drink, not drinking to get drunk. That's never the point, and that's not a good thing. And doing all of it in excess is also bad. But it's keeping it together. It's definitely a way to help happiness come about, to loosen up, and bring that joy into our lives, but obviously never in excess.
Is there any status on like intoxication and the role of intoxication in the Buddhist?
Trying to think. I don't, not much. So intoxication, the way we think about it, being inebriated and, out of it, I don't think has much of a place in Judaism. There's Purim to drink ad la yada. But that aside, we definitely don't drink to get drunk, and to not be aware of our surroundings and aware of what we're doing and the effect we're having on the people around us and the things around us. Anything we do, eating we're not eating just to eat. We're eating to be full and satiated, to have strength in order to serve God. So the alcohol, I think, falls straight in line with that. It does what it does, and we can't let it control us. We need to use everything that God gave us in order to help us serve Him.
I like that you shared a few minutes ago about like Chaim is like when you're drinking whiskey or you're drinking Chaim, you're looking towards something. You're not running away from something.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things that reminds me of is also this concept in terms of alcohol, how one of the from the Bible that a root of every single desire is actually a desire to be Hashem. So that if there is a person who's trying to escape using alcohol or whatever else it is. At the root of that taiva is actually a desire for truth, a desire to experience the truth with Kodesh Baruch. And what's interesting to me, and this is definitely Chabad in Chabad, this whole idea of how to bring a Chaim, and you're feeding Nefesh.
You cut out there. I think you froze there, at least on my side. I'm not hearing anything. Do you hear me? Well, it seems like Eitan is having maybe some internet trouble or signal trouble. I'm not sure what's happening. We can talk about some bourbon in the meantime. So we mentioned before about bourbon that there's 4 grains mostly that go into it. Eitan, it seems, is offline now. Hold on one second. Let's see if we can get him back. Yeah, it seems his Wi-Fi is down. Let me see if I can invite him back to the program. Bear with me for just one moment. All right, Eitan is trying to get back on from his phone. We'll see if that works. So we spoke earlier about what makes a product a bourbon. So we'll get into that a little bit more. We mentioned that it has to be made in America. It's America's native spirit.
Okay.
Oh, there he is. We were just talking about bourbon. I was filling the time with some of the rules of bourbon. But welcome back.
So please keep going. And then John Morris has a question. Can you share some bourbons that we may be able to find in Florida or New Jersey?
Absolutely. So I was just saying some of the rules of bourbon. So we mentioned before that it has to be made in America. And we spoke a little bit about that the corn has to be 51% or more in the recipe, in the mash bill. Another one of the rules is it has to be aged in a brand new oak cask. So you can't use port casks or sherry casks or anything like that in a bourbon. The next 3 rules are a little bit more technical and has to do with the proof. So in the distilling process, you can distill the product only up to 160 proof, which is 80% alcohol by volume. So each time you distill it, it'll get a higher proof. You can distill it a couple times, but you cannot distill it over 160. The next rule, though, is that you can't put it into the barrel at more than 125. So you're capped at 160 on the distill, and you're capped at 125 on barreling. So you have a 35 proof difference there between the max that it can come off the still and the max that it can go into the barrel. And what's done there is it'll be cut with water if it's higher than the 125 in order to bring it down. And some people will barrel it at much lower than that, but the 125 is the cap. The third rule, though, is that when it goes into the bottle, it has to be no less than 80 proof. So it can drop considerably over the aging process. It normally stays around the same. It can go up a little, go down a little. It's never exactly the same. And then it can either be barreled at at barrel strength or cask strength, and then it'll be usually around 110, 105, 117. It varies there, and that all depends on the weather over the years, how long it's been in the barrel, and all of that. Or it can be cut down with water to any number down to 80 proof. Now the question was New Jersey and Florida, what should be available there?
Yes, share some bourbons that we may be able to find in Florida or New Jersey.
So Florida is actually a really good market for bourbon. They bring in a lot of stuff. Texas is good. Not sure about what's available in New Jersey, but there should be a pretty good selection. Some nice things I'd look for is maybe a Peerless bourbon is really nice. Elijah Craig. There's a barrel proof. There's an 18 and a 12 year that are all really, really good products. And those should be available in definitely in Florida and probably in New Jersey as well.
Is there any more, it's hitting me. What other cautious connectors are there in terms of bourbon?
So we discussed the ingredients. The ingredients are, corn, barley, rye, wheat, some other grains, maybe, water and yeast. So the yeast could be a problem. Usually yeasts are kosher, but that would have to be checked. But the majority of the time, bourbon being made, the fermentation process, the distilling process, and the aging process, the bourbon should remain kosher, aside from the Passover issue that we spoke about before. The problems really occur after the product leaves the barrel. So you have a company like Jim Beam is a good example. Huge company, they make 70% of the bourbon. So by far the largest. But bourbon's not the only thing they make. They have, a few thousand products that they make. They can have cognacs, wines, brandies, flavored products that all could be intrinsically non-kosher. And then there could be cross-contamination between the equipment used for the non-kosher products and the kosher products. And that's a big part of where kosher gets involved in the bourbon industry. Another part is, we spoke about before, the wine casks. So there are some bourbons that after they age it in their brand new cask, they'll do a finishing for a few months, sometimes 6 months, 8 months, or any time at all, really. But primarily it's usually around 6 months in a wine cask as a finisher. And that could be a kosher problem as well. We have to make sure there's no cross-contamination with those products in as well. Another problem is when you have smaller companies that aren't making their own product. So you have these new, smaller companies that are buying product from the big distillers. So how does it get to their facility, to their bottling company? Or do they even have a bottling company? Does it get bottled by someone else? Let's say you wanted to make the, Aleph bourbon. Mm-hmm. So in order for that to happen, you'd have to, spend millions of dollars on equipment and then make your product and then put it in a barrel and let it sit for a couple of years. And you'd have this huge investment before you can even sell a product. It could be tens of millions of dollars. So what a lot of people will do is, even if they do that, in order to have some revenue in the meantime until their product is ready, they'll buy from the big distillers and start their branding, start selling some stuff, and just have some income coming in. So when that happens, we have to make sure that the product they're buying is kosher, the trucks that it gets moved in are kosher, the bottling facilities that it gets bottled in are kosher.
What do you mean?
Sorry, I missed that.
Why the truck?
So if, let's say, it gets dumped at a facility in Bardstown, Kentucky, and the bottling facility is in Louisville, Kentucky, so an hour away, right? So it gets dumped and gets put into a tanker, one of these big 18-wheeler trucks in Bardstown, and it gets moved up to Louisville.
So this is like a few thousand gallons worth of bourbon.
Right, it could be 7,000 gallons or so gets moved at a time. And so what was in that truck last? So getting a truck wash is a very common thing. A kosher truck wash is very common in the food industry. It just has to make sure that that is what took place. That truck could have had milk last. It could have had oils. It could have had wine. There's a lot of things that could have been in there. We want to make sure that the end product is kosher. So we have to make sure all the equipment along the way is kosher as well.
So is this like one of those big, it looks like a big canister on the bed of the truck? It's like a big round.
Yeah, kind of ovalish, just like a cylinder on wheels. What they transport fuel in. Same style truck.
But it could be, but instead it's filled with alcohol.
Right. So obviously they have food grade ones and not. There's flammable grade ones for gasoline and etc. But yeah, there's tons of food ones that transport stuff all the time. Most of the ones you see on the highway are usually going to be food and not fuel.
Do you remember the first time that you had bourbon?
I remember the first time I had bourbon. No.
Okay. So I'm guessing that it was part of your life.
That it was? Always
a part of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Louisville. Kentucky's the bourbon capital of the world. It's definitely part of the life here. A lot of people I know are in the industry. A lot of families deal with bourbon, work in the companies here. So yeah, it's definitely around.
And did you have whiskey and bourbon at your Shabbos table?
I have bourbon whiskey at the Shabbos table. Very little other whiskeys make it.
No, but when you were growing
up, actually, my father's more of a vodka person. But yeah, there was always some bourbon around.
So then, how did you develop such a passion for it that you've created this niche?
I hope my father's not watching. Maybe I just have a better palate.
Interesting. So there wasn't like some sort of experience where you drank it, or you had a teacher, or just some sort of event where like you were like, oh wow, like this is a whole world.
So I got into the kosher side of it before I got into promoting and the whole Bourbon Rabbi thing. I was in on the kosher side first and got to know a lot of the master distillers, a lot of the people involved in the industry, and got to talking to them. And there's a very rich history, especially here in Kentucky, in the bourbon industry. And just that passion just started growing, and the knowledge started growing, and there's some really, really great people around here that I was able to speak to and pick their brains for years. And that's kind of what guided me in this endeavor.
That's so interesting. So it's interesting how like as a rabbi who is there to perform the service of making sure that a product is kosher, you went beyond the surface level and actually started talking to these people about what they were doing and got into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I got to sit down with Jimmy Russell years ago, who's the master distiller at Wild Turkey. Just a phenomenal person, with Parker Beam from Heaven Hill. Just there's just the amount of knowledge that these people have is absolutely incredible, and the history they know and the stuff they know about bourbon, and it's
one of the things that I love about Torah and the Torah in general is that so many muscles for spiritual refinement are based on physical things.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously, there's also the story of the altar Rebbe. I forget which. I think it's somewhere in Torah, or I can't remember where. He talks about how when you're looking at a candle, there's the flame, there's the wick, and then there's the wax. And this becomes a metaphor for spiritual growth. Watching a candle. right? It's a physical thing. And especially in our day and age where it's like we're generally watching screens, it's like how many people actually sit and watch a candle? Well, 200 years ago, there wasn't as many things to do, right? And so you could really pay attention.
That was entertaining.
Right. You could pay attention to how a candle was burning, but then it makes you think, right? It takes you into a deeper level. And it sounds like in a certain way, the same thing is happening to you in terms of distilling.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, definitely a good comparison.
So what is that? What's the spiritual muscle of distilling?
It's actually a good question. That aging process and that the distilling itself is just taking all of these different grains that are together. They've been fermented and wrapped together, all these different types. Corn, which is vastly different from rye, which is vastly different from wheat, which is vastly different from barley. They all sit and they all meld together until you get your mash bill, which is the proprietary recipe that a lot of the distillers won't tell you what's in their bourbon. They won't tell you exactly what the mash bill is. So it's all these different things, and each one of them individually is important. And then they all get heated up together and around, turned into steam and back into a liquid, going through all these processes. All of us, we're all part of it. And in this world, we're all getting all mixed together and all heated up and cooled back down and heated up. And then we age together and we sit and we dwell in this world over just for ages and ages and ages. And we hope that at the end, when we're poured out of the barrel, that, it's a rich, delicious ending that we end up with after all of this took place over the course of all of this time and all this energy.
That's definitely a muscle for the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you. Another question for you. Well, first of all, let's just do some plugs. So first of all, if you're enjoying it, please check out Aleph Mail, alephmail.com. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube. We are all about Jewish sacred masculinity, and there's a lot of questions up there, especially in our time, about masculine and feminine, and basically, it's like what Aleph Mail is about is we're transcending alpha male masculinity, which a lot of people are rejecting, to Aleph male masculinity, which means that the best a man can be is not a dog, but the best a man can be is like God. That we as human beings are actually made in Elohim, made in His image, which means we can be so much more than a dog, right? Which is really a muscle for the nefesh behema. And the behavior of the alpha male masculinity is very much nefesh behema behavior. And the idea is that we can actually connect to this, chelek elokim mamish, this infinite spark inside of us that's connected to something which is totally beyond this world. And through Torah and and spiritual refinement and working on our character, we can become a blessing. And that's really what being an Aleph male is about, being a man. It's being a man who truly walks with them, which is a totally different world. And also what does Hashem give? Right? He's not about get this or get that. Hashem is giving. And so it's a different muscle for masculinity. And then, of course, we have our products, our beard oil, and our beard balm, which I'll definitely send you some. Which is also the beard represents the Moroccan. It's incredible because actually a lot of the content on other beard brands and channels is very much about bikers and women and this and that. But there's a completely different story in Torah about what the beard is about. That it's literally a way of blessing and kindness and mercy and patience and things. It's just a different story. So that's part of what Aleph is about. And Rabbi Chaim, how can people get in touch with you? How can people find out about what you're doing?
So you can check out bourbonrabbi.com or on Instagram at Bourbon Rabbi. And all the information's up there. We have a weekly tasting Torah is what we call it, where we do a Dvar Torah and we taste the whiskey. We go through, what it looks like, how it smells, how it tastes, the finish, full whiskey review. And that's every Thursday night at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. And you can find that on Facebook, on Bourbon Rabbi, the Bourbon Rabbi page, and on Instagram at Bourbon Rabbi.
Okay, and before we finish off, any last thoughts, stories that you want to share before we wrap this up?
Let's see. I never want to not share. But I think we covered quite a bit. I think we got a good bit of Torah, a good bit of bourbon. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so do you have a bracha for our audience?
Absolutely. So, like we mentioned before, the making and the process of whiskey, we compare to the circle of life, and everyone's life. We should involve other people, other things. Everything in this world is created in order for us to benefit from it and to use it to serve God. I mean, we see that in the people around us and the things around us, and continue to serve God and continue to take the things that God gives us to help that in order to bring Mashiach. We can all join Eitan in Israel immediately. L'chaim, l'chaim.
L'chaim, l'chaim. And I look forward to today that you and I can make l'chaim here in Eretz Israel.
I'm looking forward to it. Absolutely.
Okay, we're gonna end my broadcast in 3, 2, 1. Peace, people. Okay.